Good morning, BG4. It's kind of a fun morning for me because it's different. We've experienced a snow event. I started the morning doing soap journaling with the Sunday morning soap group that meets at 8:45 on normal Sundays. But today we shared about Genesis 1 through text. And all of us were agreeing that it was an amazing time to focus on God the Creator because it's so beautiful outside. It points our eyes to Him. I hope you are enjoying the view. I hope you are safe and warm. And I thank you for taking a few minutes to connect with your church family via the internet. We are starting a series today called Temple. It's on the book of Genesis, and that might seem like an odd name for a sermon series on Genesis. I mean, isn't that more about like Exodus if you're a Bible person, or where they have instructions, or maybe about First Kings? I hope you'll understand a little bit more of why we chose that name when I finish these brief thoughts on Genesis chapter 1, God the Creator. Well, first I was reflecting on the fact that probably about 5 years ago, my kids were younger, it was summer, and they were bored. And you know how that can go. And so I decided to be a fun mom and take them to Battleground Cinema for a matinee. And knowing myself, it was probably $5 Tuesday. So we decided late, and it took us a while to get out the door. It's kind of typical of us, and we were late for the movie. I told my kids, don't worry about it. There's always so many previews. We're going to be fine. Only we weren't fine. We missed at least 10, maybe 15 minutes of the beginning of this movie. The movie was The Meg, as in Megalodon. It was about a prehistoric shark that is somehow living today, terrorizing people. Well, the movie, we didn't know who the main characters were. We didn't know what the plot was, and all of it seemed very confusing, but I just chalked that up to it being a bad movie. Until a few months later, my boys streamed the movie and they said to me, Mom, remember that movie we saw, The Meg? It made so much more sense when we got to see the beginning. That story came to mind today as I was thinking about understanding the beginning of the story. You see, the Bible is a rich and complex story. There's so much here. If you love characters and the way that characters develop over time and multi-generational stories or series, you like to binge that on Netflix, that kind of multi-generational character development is right here in the Bible. If you like suspense and you like action and adventure, it's in the Bible. If you like things to definitely be resolved at the end, you'll also find that the Bible has an amazing ending. But what you won't find is simple. What you won't find is something that's just easy to understand wherever you pick up the story. In fact, if you miss the beginning, you might find the Bible really hard to understand. The beginning sets so many things in place. Also, on a larger scale, if humans don't understand their beginning, we will struggle to understand our story. And so it's with that in mind that we approach Genesis this morning. There are several competing worldviews, the way that people look at life in our world today. One that is quite common is postmodernism. One way that we say it popularly is you be you, boo, or create your own story, your own meaning. That is so widespread, really amongst all generations, but it's especially known amongst younger people. And I truly believe that the pressure that we have to create meaning, that we have to invent our own story, is part of the incredible rise in mental health problems among people of all ages, but especially young people today. It's too much pressure. It's more than we were made for to invent our story. We long to be part of a story that's bigger than we are. And so, as we come to Genesis this morning, let me tell you what we're not going to do. I grew up homeschooled in the 90s. Some of you don't know what that means, but it was a time of really wanting to separate yourself from the way that the world thinks. And I have been exposed and read so much literature on science and the Bible and defending the Bible against modern scientific theories, et cetera, that I really have grown so tired of arguing about Genesis, arguing about origins. Instead, I want us this morning to focus on reading the Bible on its own terms, reading the Bible for what it has to say to us. We need to understand that the Bible was written to an actual ancient audience. It was written to answer their questions with their language, their images, what they understood. We get to listen into the conversation, but we can't force our questions on them. And something that I've discovered is if you look at stories across ancient cultures, so beyond the Bible, you will find that ancient people didn't ask very many questions about where matter and energy came from. Those are our questions. Instead, they asked about meaning. Why was this beautiful and wild world created? Why do we find ourselves here? What is our place in it? That was the question that the ancient Hebrews were asking, and that is the story that we find unfolding in Genesis, and we need to read it on its own terms. More than anything else, Genesis is about worship of the true God, and if we're willing to listen to the beginning of the story, we might find ourselves part of something bigger and more beautiful than we ever thought possible. I'm going to read just a couple of verses this morning from Genesis chapter 1. But on this snow day, I would greatly encourage you to go back and read the chapter. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the water. And then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image, and in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. That's Genesis 1 and 2, and 26 and 27. God sets the purpose for creation. If you don't remember anything else from this little talk this morning, I hope you hear this. In the beginning, God. He is the main character of the story. Before any of the action unfolds, we meet the great cause. And one thing I know is there is no scientific explanation for what comes before the Big Bang or the beginning of creation or whatever you want to call it. Even in our day and age, no one has an answer for what the ultimate cause is. The ultimate cause has a name: God, Yahweh, the Lord. So we meet the main character. I also think it is an incredible relief to understand that I'm not the main character in this story. You're not the main character in this story. We don't carry the pressure of creating meaning from scratch. We find ourselves in God's story. We are supporting characters in this great narrative that's unfolding, and God's the main character. Sometimes I think some of the most important work of faith is remembering that God's the main character. I'm so prone to thinking that I'm the main character, I'm struggling through, and I'm going to add God as a charm to my charm bracelet to help me through the difficulties. I need to be reoriented and recognize my small place in his big world and big story where he is the main character. And that allows me to realize that God is so much bigger than I am. And so Genesis 1 is a summary. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It would be a lot like us saying God created everything from A to Z. And the next two chapters, Genesis 1 and 2, are going to give us two different accounts of creation. They're complementary, they're not contradictory, but they're organized differently. And that is an important point. They're organized. This is not a science book that is trying to tell us exactly about matter and energy. It's also not it doesn't seem to be organized necessarily chronologically. Rather, it's organized around some big ideas. Let me unpack that for you, because that might sound a little bit shocking. God formed and filled the cosmos. So Genesis 1:2 says that the earth was formless and empty. So that's kind of the problem, so to speak. It needs order and it needs filling. Formless and empty. Form and filling. And so in Genesis 1, we hear about how God gave order. He created the containers, the forms, and then he filled those. On days 1, 2, and 3, he created the day and the night. And then on day 3, he separated the sky and the water. And that's day 2. On day 3, he separated the dry land from the water. Those are the forms. Then he filled them. He filled the day and the night with the sun, moon, and stars. He filled the sky and the seas with creatures, birds and fish. He filled the dry land with animals and with humans. Now, the way that this is organized is all about form and function rather than being organized around a strict chronology. It's a type of outline that is extremely poetic, it's rhythmic, but that in no way means it's not true. It's deeply true, but it's also a beautiful picture, and we have to try to see what the author is seeing. What is the author seeing? The author sees a temple established for worship. How do I know that? Well, this author gives us clues. For ancient people, a temple was the absolute center of life, the center of towns, and it was believed to be the place where heaven and earth overlap. Now remember, this is the story of how God created the heavens and the earth and how they fit together. A temple was generally surrounded by a beautiful garden. In fact, the Hebrew temple had these incredible motifs of garden and trees, referencing the Garden of Eden on its bas-relief on the inside. But what if it wasn't only remembering the Garden of Eden, but the Garden of Eden was also a temple at the center of creation? And so this author is telling us how God built the cosmos as a temple. Temples had 7-day inaugurations. The Hebrew temple did. And then at the end of those 7 days in 1 Kings, God came and rested in the temple. His presence arrived. He was enthroned in his temple. The purpose of a temple was for worship, but also for communion between God and people. And so the urgent message of Genesis is not about culture wars or arguing about science. It's about you and me and our Creator God. He created this incredible, beautiful world that we get to enjoy. And he created it for the purpose of worship and communion. At the center of every temple was an image. Everywhere in the world, that image was metal or it was wood. It was to represent the God and that God's authority and presence. But the Hebrew temple was famous for having no image of Yahweh. Why? Genesis tells us why. At the center of this temple that God built, the universe, he placed his image, the man and the woman. And so as we close today, I want you to consider this incredible fact. God built this incredible world for a purpose, and that purpose was worship and relationship. Is there an opportunity today, throughout the week, that you can realign your vision to remember the way that you are loved, the way that you are at the center of God's creativity, and the fact that you do not have to create a purpose for your life. You discover what it means to be a God worshiper and a God friend. God created you for that, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in him. And so I'd like to pray as I leave you with the fact that you are living in a wild and beautiful world that God created, and you are at the center of his love and created for a purpose, to be able to reflect worship to God and care for the creation he made. God, I want to thank you for the truth of your word. I want to thank you that when our hearts are aligned, when we discover what we were made for, life works. We find our rest in you. And so I pray that you'd be with all of us and wherever we are on this day, and that you would remind us of who you are and our place in your big story. In Jesus' name, amen. See you next week, and have a wonderful and safe snow day. I also want to tell you that we have an annual church business meeting on the 28th. Have a great day.